The starship Silent Claw descended through the thick atmosphere of the frontier world, its sleek, predatory design cutting through the clouds like a blade. Inside the vessel, Xerxel, a Vathari huntress of legendary skill, adjusted the settings. On her wrist scanner, her sharp silver eyes flickered with anticipation. This planet was supposed to be nothing special, just another backwater colony, barely worth her time. But the rumors had drawn her here. Humans, the galaxy spoke of them in whispers, soft-skinned, clawless creatures who had somehow survived every predator that had ever stalked them. Some even claimed they enjoyed being hunted. It made no sense. Prey should fear. Prey should run. Yet the reports said these humans did neither. Her boots touched the damp soil as she stepped out, the tall grass swaying around her. The air smelled of rain and earth, unfamiliar yet oddly pleasant. The scanner in her hand beeped once, detecting movement half a kilometer east. A smirk curled her lips. Finally, the hunt would begin. She moved silently, her muscles coiled like a spring, every sense honed for the chase. But when she reached the coordinates, there was no frantic scramble, no desperate attempt to hide. Instead, a lone human male sat on a fallen log, whittling a piece of wood with a small knife. He didn't even look up. "You're late," he said, his voice calm, almost amused. Xerxel froze. No prey had ever waited for her. None had ever spoken to her like this, like she was an expected guest, not a threat. The human finally glanced up, revealing dark eyes that held no fear, only quiet curiosity. He was lean, his skin marked by sun and wind, his hands rough from labor. Nothing about him suggested danger. And yet, the way he watched her, like he was the one assessing her, sent an unfamiliar prickle down her spine. "I am Xerxel," she said, her voice low, testing. "Last hunter of the Vathari." The human nodded, as if this meant nothing to him. "Kael," he replied. Then, with a small grin, he added, "Last volunteer of Earth." Xerxel's tail flicked in irritation. "You do not run." Kael shrugged. "Where's the fun in that?" He stood, stretching lazily before tossing the carved wood into the grass. It landed with a soft thud, a tiny, perfect bird. "If you want to chase, you'll have to make it interesting." For the first time in her long career, Xerxel felt something unsettling. Not anger, not excitement, uncertainty. This wasn't how the game was played. Prey should fight or flee. They shouldn't stand there, smiling, as if they had already won. Kael tilted his head, studying her. "You look disappointed." "I expected a challenge," she admitted. His grin widened. "Oh, you'll get one. Just not the kind you're used to." And with that, he turned and walked away, not in a hurry, not even looking back, just leaving. As if she were nothing to fear at all, Xerxel watched him go, her claws flexing at her sides. This wasn't right. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. But for some reason, she followed. Xerxel moved silently through the dense undergrowth, her senses sharp, her muscles coiled like a predator ready to strike. Kael walked ahead of her, unhurried, his footsteps steady on the uneven ground. He didn't glance back, didn't try to hide his pathomist as if he wanted her to follow. It made no sense. No prey in the galaxy was this careless. No prey was this bold. The forest around them was alive with sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of some winged creature, the soft murmur of a nearby stream. Earth, she had heard, was a world of water and green things, but seeing it firsthand was different. It was peaceful, too peaceful. A hunt should be tense, exhilarating, a battle of instinct and will, but this felt like a stroll. "You're not even trying," Xerxel finally said, her voice edged with frustration. Kael chuckled, stepping over a fallen branch. "Trying what? To escape? To fight? To survive?" He paused then, turning just enough to glance at her over his shoulder. His expression was unreadable. "Who says I'm not?" Before she could respond, he moved again, slipping between two thick trees. Xerxel followed, her claws digging into the soft earth only to stop short as the ground beneath her gave way. A trap. Instinct kicked in, her body twisting midair to avoid the worst of the fall, but she still landed hard in a shallow pit. The breath knocked from her lungs. Above her, Kael peered down, his face framed by the sunlight filtering through. "The leaves, see?" he said, grinning. "I am trying." Xerxel hissed. Her pride stung more than her body. She could climb out easily. The pit wasn't deep, but the fact that he'd led her into it, that she hadn't even noticed. It was infuriating. "You play games," she snapped, hauling herself up and out in one smooth motion. Kael shrugged. "Isn't that what hunting is? A game? No, hunting is truth. It is life and death. It is the natural order." He tilted his head, considering her words. Then, without warning, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and round of fruit. Deep red and slightly wrinkled. He tossed it to her. She caught it on reflex, her claws careful not to pierce the fragile skin. "Try it," he said. "It's sweet." Xerxel stared at the offering, bewildered. Prey did not feed their hunters. Prey did not share. "Why?" she demanded. Kael's smile softened, just a little. "Because you looked like you could use it." She almost threw it back at him. Almost, but something curiosity maybe made her hesitate. Slowly, she brought the fruit to her lips and took a cautious bite. The flavor burst across her tongue, rich and unfamiliar, almost too strong. Sweet, yes, but with something else beneath it. Earthy, alive. It's not unpleasant, she admitted grudgingly. Kael laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. High praise. Then he turned and started walking again. Zerixel watched him go, the taste of the fruit still lingering in her mouth. This human made no sense. He set traps but didn't kill. He ran but didn't flee. He offered food instead of fear. And yet, she followed. Again, the trees began to thin as they reached the edge of a wide open meadow. In the distance, she could see the outlines of a settlement, yellow buildings, smoke curling from chimneys. The faint sound of voices carried on the wind. Kael didn't head toward it though. Instead, he veered left, following the curve of a narrow river. You live there? Zerixel asked, nodding toward the village. Sometimes, Kael said, but not today. Then where are we going? He glanced back at her, his eyes glinting with something she couldn't name. Somewhere you've never been. Zerixel bristled. I have been to countless worlds. There is nowhere new for me. Kael's grin returned, sharp and knowing. We'll see. And with that, he stepped into the river, not crossing it. Not wading through it, but following it, his boots splashing lightly in the shallows. Zerixel hesitated only a moment before doing the same. The water was cold against her skin, the current gentle but insistent. It tugged at her, pulling her forward, as if the river itself was guiding her somewhere. She didn't like it. She didn't like any of this, and yet, she kept walking. The river led them deeper into the valley, its waters glinting under the afternoon sun like scattered fragments of glass. Zerixel kept her distance from Kael, her instincts still prickling with unease. This wasn't how a hunt was meant to unfold. She was the predator, the one who dictated the chase, yet here she was, trailing behind a human who moved with the calm certainty of someone who had already won. The landscape shifted as they walked. The trees grew taller, their trunks thick. With age, their branches intertwining overhead to form a living canopy. Sunlight filtered through in dappled patches, painting the ground in golden shadow. It was beautiful, in a way that unsettled her. Beauty was something to be conquered, not admired. Kael stopped abruptly beside a towering tree, its roots twisting like serpents into the earth. He placed a hand against the bark, his fingers tracing the grooves of its surface with something like reverence. This one's older than your civilization, he said, his voice quiet. Zerixel scoffed. A tree is just a tree, is it? He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. How many worlds have you hunted on? Dozens, and how many of them had trees like this? She hesitated. None, if she was honest. Most of the worlds she'd visited were either barren wastelands or carefully cultivated colonies, their ecosystems stripped of anything wild or untamed. But she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of admitting that. What does it matter? Kael didn't answer. Instead, he reached into a hollow in the tree and pulled out a small cloth-wrapped bundle. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a handful of dark, glossy seeds. These, he said, holding one up between his fingers, are from a tree that doesn't exist anymore. Not in the wild, at least. Zerixel frowned. Then why keep its seeds? Because someone has to. He closed his hand around the seeds, his grip gentle but firm. Hunting isn't just about the kill, Zerixel, it's about balance. Take too much, and there's nothing left to hunt. She bristled at the implied criticism. The strong survive. The weak perish. That is the way of things, is it? Kael's gaze held hers, steady and unyielding. Then, why are you here? The question struck her like a physical blow. Why was she here? She had come for a challenge, for the thrill of the hunt, but this human had given her neither fight nor flight. Instead, he had shown her traps without teeth, offered her fruit instead of fear, spoken of trees and seeds and things that made no sense in the context of predator and prey. Before she could respond, a sound cut through the air, a high, keening cry, unlike anything she'd heard before. Her body tensed, her claws extending on reflex. What was that? Kael's expression softened. Come on, he said, tucking the seeds back into their hiding place. There's something you should see. He led her off the path, pushing through a thicket of bushes into a small clearing. In the center, half hidden by tall grass, lay a creature small, furred, its sides heaving with labored breaths. One of its legs was twisted at an unnatural angle. Zerixel's first thought was easy. Prey. Her second was confusion. Kael was already moving toward the creature, his movements slow and deliberate. He crouched beside it, murmuring words too quiet for her to hear. The creature whimpered but didn't try to flee. What are you doing? Zerixel demanded. Helping, Kael said, without looking up. Why? This time, he did glance at her, his eyes dark with something she couldn't name. Because I can. She watched, torn between disdain and fascination, as he splinted the creature's leg with sticks and strips of cloth from his own sleeve. His hands were sure, his touch gentle despite the creature's occasional flinches. It made no sense. Prey was prey. Weakness was to be exploited, not mended. When he was done, Kael sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on his pants. The creature, young one, she realized, now limped a few steps before vanishing into the undergrowth. "You'll never see it again," Zeraxel said, unable to keep the scorn from her voice. Kael smiled. "I know. Then what was the point?" He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "The point," he said, "is that it'll live." Zeraxel opened her mouth to argue, but the words died on her tongue. There was no logic here, no rules she could understand. This human operated on a code entirely foreign to her, one where strength wasn't just for taking, where prey wasn't just for hunting. It should have been laughable. It should have been weak. So why did it feel like she was the one being outmaneuvered? Kael was already walking away, his silhouette framed by the setting sun. For the first time, Zeraxel didn't immediately follow. She stood there, rooted to the spot, the weight of something unfamiliar pressing against her chest. Then, slowly, she took a step forward, and then another. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple as Zeraxel followed Kael through the thickening woods. Shadows stretched long between the trees, and the air grew cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth, and something sweet, wildflowers perhaps, or the last warmth of the day clinging to the bark of the ancient trees. She should have been focused on the hunt, on the rhythm of the chase, but her thoughts kept circling back to the injured creature, to the way Kael had touched it, not with pity, but with something quieter. Something like respect. He moved ahead of her, his footsteps sure, even in the fading light. He hadn't spoken since they left the clearing, and the silence between them felt heavy, charged with things unsaid. Zeraxel's claws flexed at her sides. She wasn't used to silence. On hunts, there was always the rush of pursuit, the snarls of cornered prey, the thrill of victory. This was something else entirely. "You're not what I expected," she said at last, the words sharp, almost an accusation. Kael glanced back at her, his face half in shadow. "What did you expect? A challenge?" He chuckled, low and warm. "And I'm not." She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Complicated." This time, his laugh was louder, ringing through the trees like the call of some night creature. "Humans usually are," Zeraxel scowled. She didn't like being laughed at. She especially didn't like that she had no retort. The trees began to thin again, and the ground sloped upward into a rocky hillside. Kael climbed without hesitation, his hands finding holds in the stone as naturally as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. Zeraxel followed, her claws making the ascent easier, though she couldn't shake the feeling that she was the one being led, not the other way around. At the top of the rise, the world opened up before them. The hillside dropped away into a vast, starlit plain, dotted with the soft glow of bioluminescent plants. In the distance, the lights of the human settlement flickered like grounded stars. But it wasn't the view that caught Zeraxel's attention. Was the structure perched at the edge of the hill, a simple thing, made of wood and stone. Its roof slanted against the wind. A shelter, but not like any she'd seen before. Kael walked toward it, his steps slowing as he reached the door. He didn't enter, just stood there, his hand resting against the weathered wood. "What is this place?" Zeraxel asked. "Homie," said, and there was something in his voice she couldn't place. Sometimes she studied the small building, her nose wrinkling. It was crude, fragile, nothing like the sleek, armored dens of the Vhera. "You live here, when I'm not being hunted." He pushed the door open and stepped inside, leaving her standing there, torn between curiosity and disdain. After a moment, she followed. The interior was dim, lit only by a single lantern hanging from the ceiling. The space was small but orderly, with shelves carved into the walls, stacked with books, tools, and odd trinkets she couldn't name. A narrow bed sat in one corner, its blankets rumpled, as if Kael had only just left it. In the center of the room, a low table held a half-finished carving, another of those small wooden birds. Its wings spread mid-flight. Zera, single quotes XEL, turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. There was no sign of weapons, no trophies from past hunts, nothing to mark this as the dwelling of a predator. It was just a place, a quiet, unremarkable place. "You don't seem like much of a hunter," she said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Kael shrugged, setting the lantern on the table. "Maybe not the way you mean it." "Then how?" He picked up the wooden bird, running a thumb along its wings. "Humans hunt for a lot of reasons. Food, sure, but also knowledge, understanding." He looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the lantern light. "Some of us even hunt for stories." Zeraxel snorted. "Stories won't keep you alive, won't they?" He set the bird back down and reached for one of the books on the shelf, its cover worn with age. "Every predator in the galaxy knows the Vhera. They know your claws, your strength. But do they know you?" She stiffened. "What does that matter?" Kael opened the book, flipping through its pages with careful fingers. "Everything dies, Zeraxel, even hunters. But stories." He tapped the page. "Stories last." She wanted to argue, to snap that strength was the only thing that mattered, that stories were for prey, too weak to face the world as it was. But the words stuck in her throat. Kael watched her for a long moment, then nodded toward the door. "Come on, there's one more thing you should see." She followed him back outside, where the night air was cool against her skin. The stars were brighter here, away from the lights of the settlement, their glow undimmed by smoke or machinery. Kael led her to the edge of the hill, where the ground dropped away into darkness. "Look," he said, pointing upward. Zerexel tilted her head back and froze. The sky was alive. Not just with stars, but with movement streaks of light. Across the black, too fast to be ships, too bright to be anything natural. They came in bursts, some fading as quickly as they appeared, others lingering like sparks from a fire. "What is that?" she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. "A meteor shower," Kael said, "or what's left of one, anyway. Happens every year around this time." Zerexel had seen meteor showers before, on other worlds, but never like this. Never so close. It felt like the sky itself was reaching for her, like if she just stretched out her hand, she caught herself. Claws flexing. This was foolish. She was a hunter, not some awestruck child. And yet, she couldn't look away. Kael's voice was soft beside her. "You know, some humans believe those falling stars are the souls of the dead, returning to the sky." Zerak swallowed. "What do you believe?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, just as the brightest streak of light flared overhead, he said, "I believe we're all made of the same stuff. Stardust and stories." She didn't answer. She couldn't. But for the first time in her life, Zerexel wondered if there were things in the universe stronger than claws. And if maybe, just maybe, she'd been hunting the wrong prey all along. Dawn crept over the hills like a slow tide, washing the world in pale gold. Zerexel sat on the edge of the rocky outcrop, her legs dangling over the drop below. She hadn't slept. The night had been too full of strange thoughts, of questions, that had no answers or answers she wasn't ready to face. Behind her, the door of Kael's shelter creaked open, and his footsteps crunched softly on the gravel as he approached. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, watching the light spread across the land. "You're still here," he said finally. Zerexel flicked her tail, the tip brushing against the stone. "I haven't decided if you're worth hunting yet." Kael chuckled, but there was no mockery in it. "Fair enough." He sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his arm near hers, but not so close that it felt like a challenge. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of dew and grass, and for a while, they just sat there, watching the world wake up. "You never told me why you do this," Zerexel said at last. "Why you let hunters like me come here? Why you volunteer?" Kael picked up a small stone, turning it over in his fingers. "Why do you hunt?" "Because it's what I am, is it?" He tossed the stone into the air, caught it again. "Or is it just what you've always done?" Zerexel's claws dug into the rock beneath her. She wanted to snap at him, to tell him he knew nothing of what it meant to be Vathari, of the pride that came with the hunt. But the words wouldn't come, because somewhere, deep down, she was starting to wonder the same thing. Kael didn't press her. He just kept turning the stone in his hand, his gaze distant. "Humans used to think we were the top of the chain," he said, "that everything else was just prey or predator. Then we learned better. Learned that the chain doesn't exist. It's a circle. Everything's connected." He opened his palm, showing her the stone ordinary, unremarkable. "Even this was part of a mountain once. And someday, it'll be part of one again." Zerexel stared at the stone, then at him. "You're saying hunting is pointless. I'm saying maybe there's more to life than just surviving." He grinned. Suddenly, the expression bright and sharp, like living. She wanted to argue. She needed to argue. But the sunrise was too warm on her skin, the air too clear in her lungs. And for the first time and longer than she could remember, she felt alive, not just breathing, not just existing. Alive. It was terrifying. Kael stood, brushing dust from his pants. "Come on, there's something I want to show you." Zerexel didn't move. "More lessons." "Nah." He held out a hand to her, his palm rough with calluses, fingers scarred from countless small cuts. "Just breakfast." She looked at his hand, then up at his face. His expression was open, unguarded. No tricks, no traps. Just an offer. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and let him pull her to her feet. The path they took wound down the hillside and into a grove of trees heavy with fruit. Kael moved through them with easy familiarity, plucking a few here and there, tossing one to Zerexel without looking. She caught it on instinct, the skin of the fruit cool and slightly fuzzy under her claws. "Peach," Kael said, biting into his own. Juice ran down his chin, and he wiped it away with the back of his hand. "Sweetest ones grow here." Zerexel studied the fruit, then took a cautious bite. The flavor burst across her tongue, bright, sugary, with just a hint of something tart underneath. It was nothing like the rations on her ship, nothing like anything she'd ever eaten before. "Good, right," Kael said, around a mouthful. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. They ate in silence. The only sounds the rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. It should have felt awkward. It should have felt wrong. But it didn't. When the last of the peaches were gone, Kael led her to a shallow stream, its water clear as glass. He knelt beside it, cup in his hands to drink, and Zerexel found herself doing the same. The water was cold, clean, tasting, faintly of minerals and earth. Kael sat back on his heels, watching her. You never asked the most important question. Zerexel flicked water from her claws, which is, why you? She froze. What do you mean? Why did you come here? Of all the places in the galaxy, why hunt a human? The answer should have been easy. Because humans were a challenge. Because they were clever. Because she'd heard the stories and wanted to see if they were true. But none of that felt right anymore. I don't know, she admitted, the words strange and heavy in her mouth. Kael nodded, as if he'd expected that. Maybe you're not as sure of yourself as you thought. Zerexel's tail lashed. I am always sure, then prove it. He stood, stretching his arms overhead. Catch me, she blinked. What? Catch me, he repeated, grinning. If you can, Then he was running, darting between the trees with the same easy grace she'd seen before. Zerexel hesitated only a second before giving chase. This, at least, was familiar. This, she understood, or so she thought. Because Kael didn't run like prey, he ran like fun, like this was a game, and the only rule was to enjoy it. He leaped over fallen logs, splashed through shallow streams, even climbed a tree at one point, swinging from a low branch to land lightly on his feet, and through it all, he laughed. The sound bright and wild and utterly infectious. Zerexel found herself laughing too, the noise strange in her throat. She hadn't laughed, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed. And then, suddenly, Kael stopped. Not because she'd caught him, not because he was tired, but because they'd reached the edge of a cliff, the ground dropping away into a breathtaking view of the valley below, the river cutting through it like a silver thread. Zerexel skidded to a halt beside him, her chest heaving, her blood singing. You let me catch you, she accused. Kael shook his head, still grinning. Nope, you just followed me here. She opened her mouth to argue, but the words died as she looked out over the landreel. Looked, the way the light played on the water, the way the trees swayed in the wind, the way everything fit together, perfect and whole. And in that moment, Zerexel understood. This wasn't a hunt, it never had been. Kael bumped his shoulder against hers, his voice soft. See, she didn't answer, she didn't need to. The twin moons hung low over the valley, casting everything in a silvery glow. Zerexel stood at the edge of the cliff where Kael had led her hours earlier, her claws digging absently into the soft earth. She should have left by now, should have returned to her ship, to the cold certainty of the hunt, to the life she knew. But her feet refused to move. Behind her, the fire Kael had built crackled softly, its light dancing across the rocks. He sat cross-legged beside it, poking at the embers with a stick, his face unreadable in the flickering shadows. He hadn't spoken since sunset, and the silence between them was heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Zerexel turned abruptly, her tail lashing. This was a waste of time. Kael didn't look up. Was it? I came for a hunt. Not, ... This, she gestured vaguely at the fire, the valley, him. Funny. He tossed the stick into the flames. I thought you came for the same reason everyone does. And what's that? To find out if the stories are true, Zerexel scoffed. What stories? Kael finally met her gaze, his eyes reflecting the firelight that humans aren't just prey, that were something else entirely. She wanted to argue. Wanted to snarl that she'd known that from the start, that she'd only come to prove she could outthink even the cleverest of prey. But the words tasted like a lie. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks into the night. You could stay. You know, Kael said softly. Zerexel stiffened. Why would I do that? He shrugged. Lots of reasons. The peaches. For one, she hissed. But there was no real heat in it. You're impossible. And you're still here. That shut her up. Because he was right. She was still here. Despite everything, despite the fact that none of this made sense, Kael leaned back on his hands, tilting his head to study the stars. You know, the Vathri aren't the only hunters out there. There's a whole galaxy full of them, and most of them never stop to wonder why they hunt. Zerexel's ears flattened. I don't, but you did. He continued, as if she hadn't spoken. That's why you came. That's why you're still here. She wanted to deny it. Wanted to claw the smug certainty from his voice. But the truth was, she had wondered. Had lain awake in the dark of her ship, staring at the ceiling, asking herself questions she'd never dared to ask before. What am I hunting for? What happens when there's nothing left to chase? Kael stood, brushing dirt from his pants. Come on. Zerexel didn't move. Where now? To your ship. That surprised her. You're letting me go. He grinned, sharp and knowing. Was I ever stopping you? She had no answer for that. The walk back was quiet, the only sound the crunch of gravel underfoot and the distant call of night creatures. Zerex's ship stood where she'd left it, its sleek lines stark against the wild landscape. It looked out of place here. Like she was out of place. Kael stopped a few paces away, his hands in his pockets. Well, he said, this is it. Zerexel hesitated, her claws flexing. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? To leave, to return to her life, to forget this strange interlude ever happened. So why did it feel like she was making a mistake? Kael watched her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a wooden bird, just like the ones he'd been carving. He held it out to her. "Take it," he said, "so you don't forget." She stared at the carving, at the delicate sweep of its wings. "Forget what? That there's more to life than the hunt." Zerixel took the bird, her claws careful not to damage it. The wood was smooth under her fingers, warm from Kael's pocket. She should say something, should thank him, or curse him, or bet, before she could find the words. Kael turned and walked away, his silhouette fading into the darkness. Stood there for a long time, the carving clutched in her hand. Then, with a final glance at the stars, she boarded her ship. The engines hummed to life, the familiar vibrations soothing against her skin. She input the coordinates for the nearest jump point, her fingers moving automatically. But when the nav computer beeped, ready for her confirmation, she paused. The wooden bird sat on the console beside her, its wings outstretched as if in flight. Zerixel took a deep breath and changed course. Somewhere, out in the vast darkness of space, Kael smiled. He'd known she would.